Ever get that feeling, where you just didn't quite say what you meant? Or maybe even worse, you didn't say anything at all when you really should have.
Oh, tell me about it.
Well, today we are diving deep, deep into this idea of making our words count, really hit the mark.
Okay.
And to help us with this, we're turning to a book, Hey Son Son, that's The Power of Expression in English by Bofeng.
Right. And this book, it really hits you with this idea like it's not about being like a sutta smooth talker, you know.
Right.
It's about the impact your words have. Or, well, the lack of impact sometimes, unfortunately. The author, Bo Fang, they actually come out and say it. Like, straight up, 80% of life's troubles come from not expressing ourselves well.
80%. That's a huge chunk of life's troubles,
That
right?
makes you think, doesn't it?
So it's not just about being like a really good speaker. It's about being effective with what you say. What sort of situations is the book talking about here?
Well, there's this one story they tell about a recent graduate, really bright, super talented technically, but they just kept hitting these roadblocks at work, you know.
Oh, okay.
And the book really digs into how this person's communication style was actually kind of working against their talent, holding them back.
So were they like a chatterbox, talking too much? Or
It was more than that, actually. They weren't good at reading the room. They'd often interrupt, and they had this habit of like always trying to one-up everyone in the conversation.
I see, yeah.
It made them seem, well, kind of arrogant, even though their ideas, they were actually pretty good.
Yeah, we've all met that person, haven't we? You can almost feel the energy getting sucked out of the room, even if what they're saying is interesting. It's like brilliance can be totally hidden by poor communication.
Exactly. And this actually leads me to a question for you.
Okay.
Think about a time when you had a great idea, maybe a perfect solution, but you didn't say anything. What stopped you?
Um, well, maybe fear of being judged, or maybe not wanting to, rock the boat. Yeah, I've definitely been there.
Right. And the book gets into all these psychological barriers, like what really holds us back.
Oh, that's good.
Stage fright, fear of authority figures, social anxiety, all these things can make us clam up, when we actually want to speak our minds.
For sure.
But here's the interesting part. The book says these aren't just personality flaws. They're actually skills you can learn.
Okay, so it's not about changing who you are, but learning to communicate better. What kind of tools are we talking about?
Well, there's this funny story, actually, about this young professional totally petrified of their boss, like terrified.
Oh, I've been there. Total brain freeze, right?
Exactly. And the book's just a few things, surprisingly simple things, actually.
Oh, why?
First, you got to reframe how you see authority figures. Not like as intimidating judges or whatever,
Mhm.
but as collaborators, even potential mentors.
Okay, that's interesting.
Second, focus on actually being good at your job. Confidence comes from knowing what you're talking about, right?
So it's not just about acting confident, it's about actually having the knowledge to back it up. Yeah, that makes sense.
And third, it's the classic, face your fears thing.
Yeah.
Gradually exposing yourself to what makes you anxious, starting small and building up over time.
Right, right. Like anything else, you got to practice. But even when you do feel confident and you want to speak up, sometimes you end up talking over people or not really listening.
Oh, all the time.
Does the book address that at all?
It does. And this really surprised me, to be honest. They emphasize listening as the foundation of good communication.
Yeah, that makes sense. But I wouldn't have thought it would be such a key theme in a book about expression.
I know, right? It's a bit counterintuitive. But they have this really powerful story about a man who survived a plane crash, but then later took his own life because he felt completely unheard by his family.
Oh, wow. That's awful.
It's a tough one. But it just highlights that deep human need to be truly listened to, not just acknowledged.
Yeah, there's a big difference there. But actually listening, actively listening, it can be hard.
It is, yeah.
Does the book give any specific tips?
A few key things: genuine eye contact, thoughtful responses, and maybe hardest of all, not interrupting, even when you disagree.
Oh, that's a tough one.
It is.
It's really putting aside your own thoughts for a minute and focusing on what the other person's saying. Sometimes that means fighting your own impatience.
Oh, for sure.
I know, I struggle with that. But when I do feel truly listened to, it creates this amazing connection.
It's powerful.
So maybe we should, take a cue from the book and shift gears a bit. We're doing a lot of talking ourselves.
Sure.
What about a different aspect of good communication?
Yeah, I think I know where you're going with this.
Yeah.
Clarity, right? Being concise.
Exactly. It's not just about saying the right things, but saying them in a way that people can easily understand. And the book really makes a case for brevity.
It does.
They use this great metaphor, the traffic light.
Oh, yeah. Tell me about the traffic light metaphor.
Okay, so green light means you've got their attention, keep going, be concise and compelling. Yellow light, you're starting to wind down, maybe summarize. And red light, stop.
That is so good.
It's so simple, but it really works, And the book actually talks about what happens when you're not clear and concise.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there's this example, it's kind of scary, about a politician whose long, rambling speech cost America valuable time getting ready for a war.
Wow, okay, that's high stakes.
Talk about consequences, right? It makes you think twice about all those times you've zoned out during someone's endless explanation.
Yeah.
Have you ever been in, a meeting that just dragged on forever?
Yeah.
Just because someone wouldn't get to the point?
Oh, all the time. We've all been there, right? It makes you wonder how much more productive things could be if everyone just, like, embraced that traffic light idea.
Totally. It's interesting. We've been talking about all these ways to, express ourselves better, but the book actually talks about the power of not speaking.
Yeah, they have this whole concept called AO, which I guess you could translate as, like, the strategic use of silence.
Okay, so it's not about just being quiet. It's about, knowing when to be silent.
Right. It's about recognizing that sometimes silence can be more powerful than words.
That's interesting. I usually think of, powerful communicators as people who, command a room with their words.
Yeah.
But silence can be powerful, too. How does that work?
Well, think about those awkward situations, like when someone's gossiping or being negative. Instead of getting drawn into it, a well-placed silence, it can speak volumes.
It's like a way of saying, I'm not playing this game without actually saying it.
Exactly. It sets a boundary, protects your energy,
Yeah.
maybe even makes the other person rethink what they're saying.
I like that. But couldn't silence also be, misinterpreted?
Oh, for sure.
Like, say you're in a meeting and everyone's brainstorming. Wouldn't staying silent make you seem, I don't know, disengaged?
Yeah, that's a good point. It all depends on the context. The book stresses reading the room, understanding the kind of unspoken rules of the situation.
Right.
Brainstorming, you got to participate. But if someone's trying to pick a fight, silence might be your best weapon.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all thing. It's about choosing the right tool for the job.
Right.
There's that story from the book about the negotiation that almost fell apart because one person thought the other was being silent because they weren't interested. But actually, they were just thinking things over.
Oh, yeah, I remember that one.
It created all this unnecessary tension just from lack of communication.
It shows that even when you do choose to be silent, you got to be clear about WHY. A simple, give me a minute to think about that, can prevent a lot of misunderstandings.
That's a great tip. Okay, so shifting gears a bit, the book also talks about asking and answering questions effectively. One thing that really stuck with me was you have to prepare before asking anything, especially at work.
Yeah, it sounds obvious, but you wouldn't believe how many people ask questions they could have easily answered themselves with a little research.
Right.
Wastes everyone's time and makes you look, well, kind of lazy.
It's like going to the doctor without even Googling your symptoms, right? You're not taking responsibility for your own learning.
Exactly. And the book also says when you do ask questions, especially when you're trying to connect with someone, make sure they're questions that spark genuine interest in the other person.
Oh, that's a good one.
There's this anecdote about a young guy trying to network with some high-level executive. Instead of asking the same old, how did you get to where you are question, which, let's face it, we've all heard a million times.
Ugh, so boring.
He did some digging and found out this executive was a huge art buff. So he just casually brought up a recent exhibition he'd seen, and boom, they connected on a personal level.
It's amazing how much a good question can open doors.
It really is.
Okay, but what about answering questions? That can be even harder, especially in high pressure situations like a job interview.
Oh, for sure. The book emphasizes taking your time, not blurting out the first thing that comes to mind.
Easy to say, hard to do sometimes.
I know. There's this cautionary tale about this job candidate who just, without thinking, said something negative about their old boss.
Oof. Yeah, not good.
Guess what? Didn't get the job.
Yeah.
The book stresses framing your answers in a way that's both honest and strategic.
So you're being truthful, but you're also presenting yourself in the best light.
Exactly. It's about showing emotional intelligence, just as much as your technical skills.
That makes me think about giving and receiving feedback, which can be tricky.
It is. The book talks about this concept of which basically means gentleness or softness in how you communicate, especially when you're delivering a tough message.
So it's kind of like that sandwich approach, right? Start with praise, then give the criticism, then end on a positive note.
Right. But the praise has to be genuine, not just like empty flattery.
Okay, yeah.
And when you get to the criticism, use I statements, focus on the impact of the person's actions, not on them as a person.
So instead of saying, you're always late, which just makes people defensive.
You say, when you're late, it throws the whole team off schedule. Subtle difference, but huge impact.
It's about taking responsibility for your feelings and focusing on the problem, not the person.
Right.
What about when you have to say no? That can be so awkward.
It can.
Yeah.
The book gives some helpful scripts and strategies for saying no gracefully.
Okay, so what, like soften the blow, acknowledge their feelings?
Exactly. Communicate your boundaries clearly, but without being harsh or dismissive.
It's about respecting the other person, even when you're saying no. I'm curious, does the book talk about what to do when things get heated, Like when a conversation turns into an argument?
It does. They actually dedicate a whole section to the power of humor.
Oh, that's interesting.
And not like stand-up comedy humor. It's about using humor to disarm tense situations, build rapport, make your message more memorable.
I've definitely seen that work. A good laugh can totally change the energy in a room.
For sure. But the book also warns against humor that's offensive or at someone else's expense.
Right, you gotta be careful with that.
It's about being witty, not cruel.
So it's about using humor to bring people together, not create division. It seems like all these different elements, listening, clarity, silence, humor, they all kind of work together to create a more effective approach,
Exactly. And the book doesn't stop there. It goes into the art of negotiation, which I think a lot of people find intimidating.
Yeah, it can be.
But they break it down in a really practical way.
I think a lot of people see negotiation as like a win-lose situation, but the book sees it differently, right?
It does. It says negotiation isn't just about getting your way. It's about finding solutions that benefit everyone.
So it's more about collaboration than competition. What kind of advice do they give for those conversations?
First, go in knowing what your goals are, what you're absolutely not willing to budge on, and what you're open to compromising on.
So have a plan, basically.
Yeah. And during the negotiation itself, ask strategic questions, questions that help you understand the other person's priorities.
It's like gathering intel, but in a collaborative way.
Exactly. The book also stresses choosing your words carefully, especially when answering questions.
I bet. Every word counts, right?
It does. Think before you speak. Avoid knee-jerk reactions. It's all about staying calm and collected, even when things get tough.
I'm sensing a theme here. Emotional intelligence is key to all of this.
You got it. Be aware of your emotions, read the other person's cues, and respond in a way that's both authentic and strategic.
I'm curious, does the book give any advice for those moments when negotiations hit a wall or when emotions run high?
One thing they suggest is to actually reframe the whole negotiation as a problem-solving session.
Interesting.
Instead of focusing on individual wins, you're working together to find a solution that works for everyone.
It's like you're on the same side trying to solve a puzzle.
Exactly. And sometimes, just taking a break, stepping back for a bit, can be the best way to de-escalate things.
Like hitting the pause button so everyone can calm down.
And even in the most heated negotiations, the book says it's crucial to stay respectful and professional.
Disagree without being disagreeable.
Right. Focus on the issue, not on personal attacks.
Good point. We're almost at the end of our deep dive, but there's one more thing from the book I really want to talk about. Persuasion.
It's the culmination of everything we've discussed, right?
It feels like it. It's about using all these tools, listening, clarity, silence, humor, negotiation, to really influence and inspire people.
How to make a lasting impact.
What does the book say about how to do that?
It emphasizes appealing to emotions, not just logic. You got to understand your audience, connect with their values, make your message resonate on a deeper level.
So go beyond the facts and figures and really touch people's hearts.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's a great story about a politician trying to get people behind a controversial policy.
Oh, yeah.
Instead of just throwing facts and stats at them, he told a personal story about how the policy had affected his own family.
I see.
It made the issue real, relatable, and it helped shift public opinion.
Storytelling is such a powerful tool. It makes abstract ideas concrete and emotional. We've covered so much ground today. Is there anything else from the book that feels important to highlight before we wrap up?
One thing that really stuck with me was the focus on self-awareness. Like,
Yeah.
it's woven through the whole book.
Yeah.
This idea that to really express yourself, well, you got to understand yourself first. Your strengths, weaknesses, how you tend to communicate,
Yeah, like that whole know thyself thing.
right?
You can't really connect with others or be genuine if you don't even get yourself.
Exactly. The book really encourages us to look at our own communication habits.
Yeah.
Like, are we being clear and concise? Are we really listening? Are we approaching conversations with, respect and gentleness?
It's like taking stock, right? What are we good at? What do we need to work on?
And the book actually gives you tips on how to do that. Like, if you tend to ramble on, try practicing how to summarize things in just a few sentences. Or if you're always interrupting people, try those active listening techniques we talked about. Be more aware of when you're jumping in before the other person's finished.
It's like building up those communication muscles,
Hmm.
right? With practice and effort. And I think that ties back to the whole idea of empowerment. We
Hmm.
actually have the power to change how we communicate, and that changes how people see us.
It's not about being someone you're not. It's about being the best version of yourself, communication-wise at least.
Right. And that's exciting because it means we're not stuck with whatever bad habits we've picked up. We can choose to change, to get better, to be more effective.
Exactly.
Right.
And that's powerful because it means we're not just stuck with however we've been communicating all these years. There's always room to improve, to refine things, to find new ways to connect and express ourselves authentically.
So this book, it's kind of like a roadmap, right? For getting better at this whole communication thing and finding your voice.
That's a great way to put it. Communication, it's a lifelong process, really. Always something new to learn, new ways to connect, to express yourself genuinely.
Well, I think we've done a pretty deep dive here into Bofeng's, or Befengzi, or the power of expression for our English speakers. We've covered a lot,
We have.
from dealing with fear and listening better, to being clear and concise, to knowing when to be silent, using humor, negotiation, persuasion.
And that key idea of self-awareness, right? That to communicate well, you got to know yourself first. And it's a skill you can work on, not something you're just born with or without.
Right. It's been fascinating, and I hope everyone listening has picked up some useful tips they can use in their own lives.
If you want to take your communication to the next level, this book is definitely worth checking out. Packed with practical advice and, inspiring stories that can help you find your voice and make every word count.
And remember, like the book says, just knowing the stuff isn't enough. You got to actually put it into practice. So, one last thought for you to chew on. Imagine you could go back and redo one conversation where you messed up, where you didn't say what you really meant. What would you say differently?
Think about that for a bit. All the things we've talked about today, how can you use them to become a better communicator? It's a journey. We're all on it. And with a little effort, we can make our words really matter.
Absolutely. That's all for this deep dive. Until next time, keep those conversations going and keep those words meaningful.